The lawyer's office smelled faintly of dust and old carpet glue, the kind of air that settles after too many lives have passed through it. My brother sat across the table, jaw set, hands folded as if in prayer, though I knew better. It wasn't prayer. It was triumph. The lawyer cleared his throat and slid the papers across. The will, already stamped and sealed. My brother didn't wait for explanation. He leaned forward, picked up the stack, and spoke as though the room belonged to him. "Father made it clear," he said, his voice smooth, carrying over mine. "The estate is mine. Sole beneficiary." He said it without hesitation, as though he had rehearsed those words in the mirror. The lawyer didn't look at me. Neither did the clerk by the door. My presence was acknowledged the way one acknowledges an umbrella in the corner, a thing that might have served a purpose once, but not today. For years, I had been the one who stayed. I drove our mother to her appointments, repaired the leaking gutters, paid bills when father's pension fell short. My brother came only for holidays, brief visits with polished shoes and expensive gifts. He always left early, business to attend to elsewhere. And now, when it mattered, it was as if those years of quiet labour had dissolved into the air, invisible and weightless. The lawyer's words blurred. Something about no dispute, legal clarity, absolute designation. I heard them but could not feel them. My brother's eyes slid toward me, not cruel, just dismissive, the glance you give someone already erased. I tried to speak once. My mouth opened, but my tongue caught. What would I say? That it was unfair? Fairness had no seat at that table. Paper did. Signatures did. The law, or at least the version of it presented, sat heavy in the room. The imbalance was total. He had the documents, the lawyer's nod, even the silent approval of relatives who had gathered in the hallway, whispering. I had nothing but the memory of years that no one had written down. When the meeting ended, my brother shook the lawyer's hand as though sealing a deal he had earned. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor louder than I intended. No one stopped me. No one looked. The corridor outside stretched long and hollow. My footsteps echoed. I caught a glimpse of the family portraits that still hung there from our childhood visits. My brother's smile, wide, certain. Mine, smaller, tentative, already receding. I left the building without a word. The air outside was colder than it should have been for that month. Cars passed, indifferent. I put my hands in my pockets, felt the absence of keys, of papers, of claim. Stunned but silent, I walked away. In the weeks after that meeting, silence became my refuge. I stopped answering family calls when cousins sent polite messages. What happened? Is it true? I left them unread. At dinners I once hosted, my chair stood empty, and I knew it was easier for them that way. One less complication. At first, the quiet was unbearable. I would wake in the middle of the night, stomach tight, mind circling the same questions. How had I been erased so easily? How could years of care be worth less than a single clause in a document? The house felt hostile, every corner reminding me of labour unacknowledged. The patched roof, the painted fence, the drawers I had organised for my father's medical records. All of it, done quietly, now invisible. I stopped cooking proper meals. Bread and tea in the evenings, sometimes nothing. The fridge hummed like an indifferent machine. The couch sagged where I used to sit with our parents. I left it untouched, sitting instead at the kitchen table with unpaid bills stacked neatly in front of me, though they were no longer mine to pay. But with silence came space. And in that space, I began to see the imbalance clearly. My brother had claimed the inheritance, but in doing so, he had claimed the responsibilities too, though he didn't realise it. The property tax notices, the leaking water lines, the cracked windows. He had taken the house on paper, but not the years of care it required. He thought possession was power. I knew better. The clarity came slowly, through small, ordinary details. I noticed the calls from utilities still arriving in my mailbox, addressed to our father. My brother hadn't updated the records. He hadn't thought about it. In his mind, wealth was static, an object to be owned, not a living system that demanded attention. At family gatherings, I stopped attending. My absence was noted with a shrug. "He's bitter," I heard one aunt say on a recording a cousin later played for me. Bitter, perhaps, but bitterness has a sharpness that can cut if one knows how to hold it. Patience is easier when you stop speaking. Words had only ever been used against me, as if my silence confirmed guilt, as if his declarations were proof. So I let silence settle. It worked like a shield. Behind it, I began to plan. The first step was paper. I pulled the will from the drawer where I had hidden my copy, the one I'd received with the lawyer's summary. I read it line by line, underlining small phrases. Most people see only the bold clauses. Sole beneficiary, exclusive ownership. But buried in the text were conditions. Maintenance of the house, payment of taxes, adherence to local regulations, clauses about property use, never intended to matter, but there nonetheless. I read them the way a mechanic studies rust on a machine, quietly, with certainty that corrosion spreads. The second step was counsel, not the family's lawyer. He had already shown where his loyalties lay. I found another, a small practice on the edge of town, a woman whose office was stacked with case files and smelled of ink and dust. She didn't wear suits polished like armor. Her jacket was frayed at the cuffs. But when she read the document, she looked up at me with a thin smile. "He thinks this gives him everything?" she asked. "He does," I said. "Good," she replied, folding the pages. Overconfidence is the easiest opponent. We spoke little after that. She explained what I needed to gather: utility records, tax assessments, repair receipts from the years I'd covered father's obligations, evidence not of ownership, but of responsibility, the kind of things no one keeps unless they've lived the grind of it. I had drawers full. The third step was observation. My brother made himself visible, almost proudly so. He threw gatherings at the house, wine bottles clinking, laughter spilling out onto the street. Photos appeared online. Him standing in the yard, him at the head of the table, him with relatives who had chosen his side. I scrolled without comment. Each picture showed more than he realized. Peeling paint in the background, gutters still sagging, weeds pushing through the walk. To me, they were not celebrations. They were evidence. I heard things too. Old neighbors telling me in passing that the roof still leaked. A cousin mentioning he had asked my brother about repairs and received only a dismissive shrug. "Not urgent," he had said. But houses don't wait. They rot in silence, the way betrayals do. All the while, I remained absent. I skipped family birthdays, weddings, even the quiet holiday meals where my place had once been taken for granted. My brother mistook my absence for surrender. Relatives told me later how he joked that I had finally accepted reality. I let him believe it. Reality has layers. The surface belonged to him. The documents, the gatherings, the smug declarations. But beneath that surface, responsibility piled up. Every unpaid bill, every unnoticed leak, every clause in the will. He thought inheritance meant freedom. He didn't understand it meant chains. The lawyer I hired kept her distance as I asked. No threats, no letters yet. Patience, she reminded me, was sharper than haste. And so I waited, watching from the edges. There was satisfaction in seeing his confidence swell, because I knew confidence blinds. He borrowed money to host larger parties. He invited extended relatives to prove his importance. He stopped returning calls from repairmen who had once dealt with me. Each oversight added weight to the file I was quietly building. And yet I never spoke against him openly. I smiled when neighbours mentioned him. I nodded when acquaintances brought up his name. Let them think the divide was settled, that I was irrelevant. Silence is underestimated until it speaks. On evenings when the planning felt heavy, I walked again to the cafe by the river. I carried the file of papers with me sometimes, flipping through receipts while sipping bitter coffee. Each slip of paper felt like a brick, building something steady, something inevitable. I remembered, too, the last words Father said to me before the hospital took him. Not about the will, not about money, just, don't be quick. He had been speaking of life, perhaps, but the words lingered now with new weight. Don't be quick. Patience reveals what haste conceals. By winter, my strategy was clear. I wouldn't confront my brother in his house, or in front of the family, or on social media where he flaunted his victories. The confrontation would come where it mattered, in a room with law, with clauses, with signatures, where arrogance has no voice, only documents do. Until then, I stayed quiet, watching him build his own collapse with every careless act. At first, the cracks were small, a delayed tax notice, a neighbour mentioning the grass had grown waist-high in the back garden. Little things, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. But I had learned long ago that neglect compounds, like rust, spreading along a pipe, silent until it bursts. The first real sign came with the letters, not mine anymore, addressed to him now. Thick envelopes stamped with warnings, folded sheets from the utility companies. He didn't open them at once. I know this because the mail carrier, old Mrs. Petrova, stopped me on the street one morning. Strange thing, she said, frowning. Your brother doesn't check the box. It's crammed full. I only nodded. When he finally did open them, it was too late for some. Late fees added weight to the debt. I didn't gloat. I simply filed away the knowledge. Then the parties stopped being quite so loud. Relatives who once filled the rooms began to make excuses. One cousin muttered something about not wanting to be drawn into financial issues. I didn't press. Silence has its own gravity. People speak into it if you wait. By spring, I heard he had borrowed against the estate. A private lender, not a bank. Too much paperwork for banks. Too many questions he couldn't answer. A neighbour told me she saw men in dark coats visiting, leaving with tight smiles. My brother called them business partners. The word tasted wrong, even when repeated second-hand. The house itself began to show the strain. Windows left unrepaired, let drafts whistle through the halls. The roof sagged more each month. Weeds split the driveway. Once, the family home had felt like an anchor, a place of solidity. Now it looked like what it had always been, a structure needing constant care, the kind he had never given. Relatives began to drift toward me quietly. A cousin rang one evening, voice low. He's not handling it, you know. He acts like everything's fine, but the money's not there. Have you spoken to him? No, I said, and left it there. Another time, an aunt stopped me in the market. She placed a hand on my arm, searching my face. You should talk to him. He doesn't listen to anyone else. I have nothing to say, I replied. And truly, I didn't. My silence had become sharper than words. Every sentence withheld cut deeper than argument. By midsummer, even his friends began to peel away. The photos on his social pages grew sparse. Fewer people, fewer smiles. When I scrolled through them late at night, I saw what he didn't. The hollowness in his eyes, the strain in his jaw, the background of each image showing more decay. He tried to sell off small items, father's old car, furniture from the study. But buyers haggled, sensing his desperation. And desperation has a scent. Once people catch it, they no longer pay fair price. They wait for the collapse. Bills stacked. Repairs multiplied. The lender grew impatient. Whispers reached me of arguments with creditors. I walked past the house once, only once, and saw him in the yard, shouting into a phone, his other hand gripping his hair. He didn't see me. I didn't stop. Every failure he suffered had been predictable. The will had handed him responsibility, but arrogance had blinded him to its weight. He thought inheritance was a crown. It was ballast, pulling him under because he never learned how to carry it. Through it all, I remained outside the frame. Relatives grew uncomfortable with his presence. Some began to hint, delicately, almost guiltily, that perhaps the arrangement wasn't as final as he claimed. I never confirmed or denied. I only listened. The lawyer I had hired told me to wait longer still. His collapse must be visible to everyone, she said. Not just to us. The moment will come when silence is no longer absence, but evidence. So I waited, as the house crumbled around him, as the family's confidence eroded, as his allies vanished. He was left standing alone in the wreckage he had built with his own pride. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was slow, humiliating, stretched over months. That was the beauty of it. A single fall can be survived, but a drawn-out erosion eats at dignity until nothing remains. And when he had nothing left to boast of, when the family whispered not of his triumph, but of his failures, that was when it was time for the confrontation. It was my brother who called for the meeting, though he would never admit it was out of desperation. The official summons came from the lawyer's office, formal and stiff, but I recognized his hand behind it. The debts had swollen, the house was decaying, and the family's whispers had turned against him. He needed to reassert control, to remind everyone he was the sole heir. I arrived early, not to show eagerness, but to choose my seat. I picked the one at the far end of the table, near the window, where the winter light spilled cold and pale across the wood. The lawyer's assistants shuffled papers. The smell of coffee lingered faintly. My brother entered 10 minutes late, as though delay could re-establish the authority he had already lost. He wore a suit, though it hung differently on him now, shoulders slumped, fabric wrinkled. His smile was tight. "Let's get this done," he said, dropping into the chair opposite me. He avoided my eyes, scanning instead the papers before him. The family gathered in cautious silence, aunts, uncles, a few cousins. They had been drawn here under the pretense of clarifying the estate. In truth, they wanted to see the spectacle. Betrayal draws an audience. Collapse keeps them in their seats. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice rehearsed. "We are here today to review matters regarding the estate of the late Mr. Certain clauses have been raised for examination." At the word clauses, my brother's head jerked slightly, as though he hadn't expected it. His eyes darted toward me, then quickly away. I didn't speak. I had nothing to add yet. The lawyer I had hired, not the family's but mine, slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were copies of the will, annotated with notes, highlighted lines, marked conditions. One in particular, buried deep in the text, that my brother had skimmed past in his rush to victory. Clause 7. 3. The property and assets herein designated shall remain under the stewardship of the named beneficiary, contingent upon demonstrated capacity for maintenance, tax compliance, and adherence to municipal and familial obligations. Failure to meet these obligations may result in transfer of stewardship to the alternate heir, as designated. Alternate heir. My name. Printed in clean black ink. Overlooked. Dismissed. Waiting. The room tightened as the words were read aloud. My brother's face drained. He leaned forward, speaking too quickly. "That's meaningless. Father never intended." The lawyer cut him off. "Intentions are irrelevant. Signatures matter, and this clause is explicit. Stewardship is conditional." He turned to me. "We have documentation, receipts, records of payments, maintenance logs, evidence that for years you bore the responsibilities now neglected." I felt the family's eyes turn. Silence, once a shield, now became my weapon. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I simply let the weight of paper, signatures, and years of unacknowledged labor speak. My brother tried to protest. "This is a technicality. I'm the heir. Everyone knows that. But confidence without ground is noise. And noise fades." The lawyer read aloud the overdue tax notices, the unpaid bills, the testimony from neighbours about disrepair. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his certainty. For the first time, I looked at him directly. His face was blotched, jaw trembling. He had been so sure I would crawl back, or disappear, or accept scraps. He had mistaken silence for surrender. Now he saw what silence had been all along: patience. The confrontation was not loud, no shouting, no slammed fists, just the steady dismantling of his arrogance, clause by clause, fact by fact. Each line of evidence stripped away the image he had built. By the end, he was no longer the sole heir, but a man caught by his own neglect. The lawyer concluded, "By the terms of the will, stewardship passes to the alternate heir, effective immediately." My brother slumped in his chair, words spilling like broken glass. "This isn't fair. You don't understand. He never meant..." But the family understood. They saw now what they had ignored. Who had carried the weight, who had remained when others left, who had borne responsibility not for appearances, but for necessity. Their silence toward him was louder than any accusation. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Dignity lies in restraint. I gathered my folder, stood, and nodded once. No speech, no triumphal claim, just acknowledgement of what had always been mine. Not only the inheritance, but the truth. As I walked out, I passed him still hunched at the table, his hands clutching the useless papers he had once waved like banners. The room was quiet except for the rustle of documents being put away. His collapse was complete, not with a crash, but with the slow, suffocating weight of reality settling in. Outside, the winter air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time in months, I breathed fully. Justice had not arrived in anger, but in silence breaking at the right moment. That was the essence of revenge, not to destroy, but to reveal. Power doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives in the silence that follows collapse. After the meeting, the family no longer looked at me as the quiet sibling on the margins. Their voices softened when they spoke to me, careful, respectful. Not out of sudden affection. Affection doesn't change that quickly, but because they had seen where authority had shifted. The weight of the estate, the responsibility of the will, had moved, and with it, perception. My brother tried at first to salvage pride. He called me 2 days later, his voice raw but forced into politeness. "Listen," he said, "we don't have to make this ugly. You've proven your point. Maybe we can work something out. Share responsibilities. Share outcomes." Outcomes. He couldn't bring himself to say the word money. I let him speak. The words tumbling over themselves. An attempt to reframe his loss as negotiation. When he finished, I answered with the same quiet tone I had carried all along. "The will is clear," I said. "There's nothing to work out." He tried again, a week later, in person this time. He showed up at the cafe where I sat, uninvited, sliding into the seat opposite me. He looked thinner, the sharp lines of his cheekbones more pronounced. The suit was gone. He wore an old jacket, one I recognized from years ago. "You've got what you wanted," he said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Congratulations. But let's be real. You can't handle it alone. The house, the upkeep, the rest of the family. You'll need me. You always did." I stirred my coffee slowly. Did I? The silence between us stretched. He blinked, realizing perhaps for the first time how little I had needed him at all. The years of care, of bills paid, of problems solved. I had handled it without him then, and I could handle it now. The reversal cut him deeper than anger would have. Rage he could have fought against, but calm dismissal left him nowhere to stand. He tried excuses next. "Father never understood my situation. He pressured me. He didn't see what I was building. That's why the will was the way it was. He wanted me to succeed." I looked out the window at the slow river current, ignoring the plea hidden inside the rationalization. "He wanted responsibility," I said, "and you showed him you couldn't carry it." The shift wasn't only between us. Relatives who once brushed me aside now approached with cautious warmth. An aunt brought me home-cooked meals, just to lighten your load. A cousin offered help with repairs on the house. Their gestures were small, but they carried the weight of acknowledgement. They had chosen sides, even if they didn't say it aloud. My brother noticed. He hated it. He called less, avoided family gatherings altogether. The few times we were in the same room, he hovered at the edges, no longer the center of attention. His arrogance had curdled into something smaller, resentment. For me, the victory was not in possession of the estate itself, but in the shift of recognition. For years, I had been dismissed, my work invisible. Now, it was his failures that were seen, and my patience that was remembered. Still, power brings its own questions. The lawyer reminded me gently. You can press for full restitution, demand repayment of debts incurred under his stewardship. The will allows it. I thought about it. About stripping him completely, leaving nothing but the lesson of his arrogance. The temptation was sharp, but so was the echo of Father's last words. Don't be quick. Justice had already arrived. Anything more might turn it into cruelty. So I waited again, not out of weakness but out of choice, my silence had always been a weapon. Now, restraint became the truest form of power. When my brother finally stopped calling, I knew the shift was complete. He had nothing left to offer, no angle to argue. The roles had reversed entirely. He was the one outside the room now, excluded, unseen. And I, once dismissed, once erased, held the ground. When the dust settled, I found myself standing in rooms that felt both familiar and strange. The house creaked in the same places, smelled faintly of old wood and dust, but the silence inside no longer cut. It belonged to me now, fully, not because of a signature, but because I had carried it all along. There were choices to make. The lawyer had explained the options. Pursue full restitution, drag my brother through court for debts, or simply take the estate as it stood and let the rest rot behind him. It would have been easy, even satisfying, to press harder, to grind his arrogance into dust with legal rulings and financial penalties. But revenge had already been served, in the simplest way possible: patience. I had watched him build his own ruin, brick by brick, until nothing was left but his embarrassment. To pile on now would have been indulgence, not justice. So I made my choice. I kept the house, repaired the roof, repainted the windows. Each task felt like restoration not just of wood and stone, but of dignity. I didn't chase him for what he owed. The absence of pursuit was its own punishment. He was left to carry the weight of debts and shame, without the excuse of my interference. The family adjusted quickly. Invitations resumed, this time addressed to me. My presence at gatherings was no longer awkward but expected. When I walked in, chairs were offered, food set aside. My silence had shifted from dismissal to authority. They no longer asked what I thought of my brother. They no longer needed to. His story was already written, and they preferred not to read it aloud. Sometimes I saw him in town, passing on the street, thinner now, shoulders bent. He didn't meet my eyes. Once, he stopped a few feet away as if he might speak, then turned abruptly and walked on. That was the aftermath. Not reconciliation, not war, just distance. I realized in those moments that the true inheritance had never been money or property. It was the endurance to outlast arrogance, to let silence do the work no argument could achieve. My brother had taken the estate on paper, and in doing so, he had inherited his own undoing. I had inherited patience. In the end, patience proved stronger. On the last night before winter settled in, I sat alone in the repaired living room. The lamp cast a warm circle of light on the table where Father's will still lay, folded neatly. I opened it one final time, reading the lines that had once erased me, then saved me. The ink hadn't changed, the words hadn't shifted, but I had. I folded it again, locked it away in the drawer, and closed it softly. Some documents matter only as long as someone believes they do. As I turned out the light, the house settled around me, solid, quiet, whole. The story was finished. My brother's greed had undone itself, and my revenge had been nothing more than patience and restraint. The real justice wasn't that I won. It was that he lost without my hand ever needing to push.